Yes, thank you very much, Anna, for this nice introduction and raising the expectations. So actually, I think I am faced with three challenges. First of all, attract your attention after lunch, and you don't fall asleep while I'm speaking. Secondly, we have to manage the time quite strictly, so please warn me if I overrun for more than 30 minutes. And finally, especially from the perspective of Settlement Working Group chairmanship, we have to finalize still the extra penalty framework. The document that you have maybe collected when you entered this building today, it's still a draft version. We must be very clear on this. We call it a final draft, and actually it's the second final draft that we updated thanks to the colleagues from the ECSDA Secretariat very closely prior to this event. I'm very thankful for this. But there still, despite a lot of achievements that we have made in the past few months, I think we are working on this since 14 months, how my chairman colleague Mathilde Journet from Euroclear advised me before I came here. So we have very intensively worked on that, and we have achieved a lot, but we're not at the end. So what did we actually achieve is building on the work that the T2S CSDR task force has done. And they started even earlier than we on the ECSDA side, on the Settlement Working Group, with this exercise, obviously. So building up on this very, very elaborated basis, we agreed amongst all the CSDs, whether or not they are using T2S, about the principles of a penalty regime that needs to be applied according to the legal terms by September next year. However, as we already heard from the ESMA colleagues, we are calculating with a timeline by November 2020 due to the later implementation of the SWIFT messages that are required for the penalty regime, message information exchange, and the T2S penalty system readiness. So, as said, independent from whether a CSD is actually using or not the T2S platform, we will all apply the same principles. When it comes, for example, to the actual calculation of the penalties, for the instructions in scope of the penalties or out of scope of the penalties, when it comes to the collection of the reference data that is required to perform the penalty calculations. And also, and this is a very recent achievement when it comes to the actual exchange of the monies, the so-called collection distribution process of the penalties, on a monthly basis. With a little caveat, when we talk about the actual collection distribution process in T2S in CSDs, we agreed to make use of the so-called payment free of delivery process, the PFOD. And this will be applied by all the CSDs for both when it comes to cross-CSD payments as well as to the payments intra-CSDs to the CSD customers. By the way, you see some slides. Don't worry too much about these slides. I will make the presentation without them. But if you have any points or questions that are mentioned on the slides themselves, please feel free to raise them. And I will talk about this as well. So, as said, the process for T2S is agreed. We have reached this agreement a few weeks ago. For the non-T2S CSDs, this looks a little bit different because due to the unavailability of a PFOD process on some CSDs, due to the national specifics of some CSDs, which might or might not have a banking license, there will be probably different ways of how to process the actual payment of the penalties on a monthly basis. So this is something I think we all as an industry have to live with, and we have to deal with. However, we acknowledge the aim of harmonizing as much as we can, but we are facing issues with that, like probably with any other regulation that needs to be put into operational terms. But I think we have a very good base, and this basis is actually described here in this document. That is indeed quite important for the whole industry, not only for us as a CSD, but for the whole industry. So everybody should make or get themselves familiar with these descriptions in the document to get ready by the timeline late 2020. These are, I think, achievements, and they sound very easy maybe, and very simple and very small, but I can tell you that we had very intense discussions sometime in the settlement working group in order to allow us to reach these achievements. And I want to use this opportunity as well to thank everybody who is participating actively in the settlement working group work from ECSDA side that allows us to really have constructive discussions, to raise very important questions, to also involve the colleagues from ESMA, sometimes also the European Commission. That is also very helpful for us to exchange views, to give us guidance, and to take what we hope the right decisions in the end. So what is not yet harmonized or what is not yet final within the document, and you can see it highlighted in the document, is that we are still applying a number of assumptions. And most of these assumptions are actually open points with ESMA. For example, when it comes to which transactions should be exempted from the penalty application. This is actually what we have agreed on in the T2S discussions. And I'll give you one example, is corporate actions on stock. So if you have corporate action on stock that is failing for settlement, then no penalty will be applied by the T2S mechanism, and no penalties will be applied by CSDs who are using their own penalty mechanism. However, again, this is an assumption. We are not sure whether this is confirmed and how this is confirmed by the colleagues from ESMA. So maybe, Fabrizio, this is something that you can take with you as well, that we have still some open items where we expect from you some information. And I know you are aware. So this is one point. The other point, and this is a tough one when it comes to our internal discussions on the settlement working group, is about what we believe is the exception handling process. On the one hand, exception handling will be required when we enter in a situation where a participant is becoming insolvent and can no longer pay or cannot pay the penalties due to be received by the CSD. As my colleagues have issued a Q&A with regard to this topic on insolvency, I must admit we have not yet looked into that into detail, but we also already recognize that we might face operational issues with regard to the actual processing of such insolvency situations. So you will find a very brief chapter in the ECSDA framework about insolvency, and we are sure that we need to enrich it, and we will come up with further detailed information as soon as we can. But currently, we really were focusing on getting ready to implementing the penalty regime on the level of the CSDs in a sort of normal situation. And the other point that I want to raise when it comes to the exception handling situations is what happens if a participant is not paying on time. And on time means that CSDs are expecting to be able to finalize the collection distribution process on the 17th business day of the month following the calculation of the penalties. So that means that the participants need to fund their respective cash accounts latest by the 17th business day. So the CSD can collect everything and pay out everything on the same day. So also on this topic, we had discussions. What happens if a CSD participant is not funding sufficiently or at all on the 17th business day? What should a CSD do? And currently we are discussing two options. I call them black and white approach. One is we make use of, and this is specifically for T2S, the pooling functionality. So we pool all the PFODs, payment fee of delivery instructions, where we need to collect money, and all the respective payouts that refer to this collection process. And if we are failing to deliver only one of the, let's say, 50 PFODs, then nothing will happen. So we are not going to collect anything, we are not going to pay anything. And the process will repeat on the next day, on the 18th business day, until we are able to collect everything and pay out everything on the same day. So this is the one direction we have been discussing for a while now already on the settlement working group. And the other one is we try to collect as much as we can on the 17th and pay out as much as we can on the 17th. This is what we call a partial redistribution process. That also means that a participant will always get what he's expecting in full. So for example, I expect 100, I get 100, even in a partial redistribution situation. So the CSD will not only pay a portion of 80 from the 100, but you get fully. However, it may then be the case that some participants are getting nothing because the CSD has not been able to collect everything and have to wait until the full collection process has taken place. And this, again, the T2S example is based on the algorithm, on the settlement algorithm that is applied by the T2S system. And we as a CSD would not steer that actively. So at the moment, we are between these two options. What should we apply? And as we could not find an agreement, and I think one of the colleagues in the panels mentioned it earlier, if somebody cannot find agreement within its own group, then he passes the question on. So we pass the question on. And we pass it on to the ESMA colleagues, asking for guidance. What in the legal terms should be the approach that the CSD should take. So we are keen on learning what the approach will be that we should take, and then be prepared. Maybe we need to change something in the framework. However, the same like I mentioned before, we work on some assumptions, and if this assumption is not correct, then we need to change it. However, it will not, and I emphasize that, it will not endanger our readiness for, and I say now, November 2020, when the whole industry, including SWIFT, including T2S, will be ready to activate the penalty processes. So this gives you a little bit of a flavor or a picture of the discussions that we are having on the settlement working group. And like my colleague Italo Di Lorenzo already mentioned, it's quite interesting, quite lively. So CSDs who are not joining this interesting settlement working group should join us. Maybe they are entering into conflicts with the policy working group, but honestly, I don't care. So the settlement working group is the more important one. Especially from a timing perspective, because we need to be ready by November 2020. No, actually, it's the whole work of a settlement working group really counts on the interaction with all the CSDs, with all the participants in this working group. That goes beyond our closed shop discussions, that goes into the direction of discussing with the regulators, with the industry like FME or ICMA. And this is really, really important from our perspective, that we are not doing something on our own, but we are really involving all necessary stakeholders in order to come up with a solution that is workable, that is accepted by the market, and that satisfies really the requirement of the regulation. Acknowledging that this is not easy to do, but we are not alone with this problem, I learned today. And I'm optimistic that when we're working all together, we come in the end to the right solutions, and we will be there on time when it comes to the penalty regime overall. Topics that I have not touched on yet with regard to the settlement discipline regime are buy-ins. So we know, especially on the associations like AFME and ICMA, there are also heavy discussions regarding the buy-in process. We're sort of happy and lucky that we are not playing such a big role when it comes to the buy-in process on the CSD side. However, still there's work to do, also on our end. I clearly say that we are relying to a large extent on the work that is done on other associations. Then we have another component on the settlement discipline regime that refers to the products that a CSD must offer, or the mandatory information that must be provided in settlement instructions. These are more or less straightforward from our perspective. Yeah? It builds on T2S functionalities, and even those CSDs who are not joining or not part of T2S yet, they are going to develop the necessary service on this one. So not much of a need for discussion from our perspective. And the third big block that we consider when we talk about settlement discipline regime is about the reporting requirements from CSDs to the regulators when it comes to settlement fails, as well to have monitoring tools for settlement fails, and this is quite important for our participants, that we also need to engage with so-called underperforming participants to agree on measures to improve the settlement efficiency. And I think this is a very important topic, and it puts, I think, the settlement topic or the post-trade industry now in a much bigger spotlight than it was in the past decades, I would say. Settlement and settlement efficiency becomes much more important than it is today. And this is why I would like everybody from our participant side to really take that serious. You will not only suffer from penalties or potentially buy-in, but you may be put sort of in a spotlight when you are in the group of underperforming customers. And you really have to commit to actions to improve your settlement efficiency. And this, from my perspective, is nothing where really the CSD can take over this role. We can give you information, details about your settlement fails. We can give a trigger, but the actual action is on the participant side. And this, I think, is very important to be understood. We can help, but the action needs to be done on the participant side. So I was already informed that I should come up with the end of my speech. So I hope you got a little flavor of the work we are doing on the settlement working group side, the achievements that we have reached in the past months, and the challenges we are still facing. And these are not the small ones. I think they are challenges for good reasons, and they are not yet solved for good reasons because they are complex. So there's a lot of work to do still on our side. We will continue the work, the hard work, and I count on everybody to support us in order to come to the right conclusions. Thank you very much for your patience. Don't forget,